Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. You'll notice that your name has defaulted to one of our colleagues, so please feel free to rename yourself.
All right.
Okay, I think we can start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Please put in the chat where you are joining us from. It is great to have you all here today. We know it's super early or super late for some of you. Welcome everyone to the virtual Gender Cafe, Understanding and Countering Anti-Gender Movements, co-organized by the Society of Gender Professionals and the CCINDLE project. I'm Gergana, my pronouns are she, her. I'm an SGP member and a part of the SGP Secretariat. I will provide you with a brief intro about SGP before I pass the floor to Professor Connie Roheband, our moderator today. So next slide, please. Before we begin this Gender Cafe, I want to quickly introduce the Society of Gender Professionals to those of you who may not already be familiar with SGP. We are a leading global membership-based association of gender practitioners, academics, and activists dedicated to promoting feminist action and applied research and raising the profile of gender expertise around the world. On the screen, you can see our mission, which includes supporting member collaboration, network building, mentoring, leadership, and advancing gender equity through feminist action and applied gender research. Our vision for the SGP is to become the largest cross-sectoral network of gender specialists worldwide, with members who feel empowered with the resources and networks they need to thrive in their careers as gender specialists, as well as to advance gender equality in their communities through coordinated feminist action. Next slide, please. So SGP has two main types of engagement. Firstly, we have subscribers and supporters, like many of you, who receive the monthly newsletter, occasional emails, and who follow SGP on social media. Secondly, we have registered members who pay annual membership fees, and SGP has members located all around the world and a membership structure with exclusive benefits. You can check out the website, genderprofessionals.org, and become a member. By becoming an SGP member, you provide critical resources to help SGP do the crucial feminist network building. SGP is fully volunteer-run and funded through membership dues only. Today, SGP has a rapidly growing community of over 50,000 members, subscribers, followers, and supporters over 4 main social media channels with very active engagement on LinkedIn and Facebook, including a closed Facebook community forum and a pilot closed LinkedIn group for current and former registered members. Next slide, please. Based on data available on our registered members, we can share that SGP's members who have signed up since the membership system was set up in 2019 are located in 81 countries listed here. Looking broadly at all SGP's online followership on social media and the countries their profiles provide, our followers and supporters are located in 114 different countries. Next slide, please. I'm very proud to announce that today's event is the first of a series of joint SGP-CCINDLE Gender Cafés to better understand what, how, and why anti-gender movements are gaining political, social, and economic legitimacy, and what a coordinated response might look like. Gender cafés help realize SGP's goal of fostering the production and dissemination of applied gender research. These events provide the space for feminist discussion and collaboration. Gender cafés are virtual conversation series connecting gender practitioners, academics, and activists to explore pressing issues. They provide non-hierarchical sharing, questioning, and learning beyond the classroom. Cafés are also professional development opportunities for members who are interested in raising the profile of gender expertise. Next slide, please. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Connie Rogeband, who is working with the CCINDLE project and will be moderating today's discussion. She is an associate professor at the Political Science Department at the University of Amsterdam. She has written extensively on the politicization of gender-based violence, gender mainstreaming and equality policies, social movements, and transnational feminist networking, based on research conducted in Netherlands, Spain, and Latin America. Her current work focuses on the implications of democratic backsliding for gender equality policies in Central and Eastern European countries and Latin America. In the New Horizon Europe CCINDLE project, she works with a group of European feminist scholars towards strengthening and reinvigorating European democracies, starting from the assumption that feminist theories and activism are essential sources of both resistance to anti-gender discourses and politics. Professor Rogeband, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for this kind introduction, and also thank you very much for this joint space. It's an honor and pleasure. And I was just admiring all the names and countries in the chat, like where you're all from. So it's wonderful to have so many people in the room from so many different countries for this Gender Café, which we start today a series, but it's not the first one on this topic, and that makes sense. It's quite an urgent topic. So I also want to welcome you then on behalf of both the SGP and the Kindle project. As said, it's a first of a series of joint cafes that focus on anti-gender campaigns and opposition to gender equality and feminism. And it's not the first Gender Café on the topics, right? There was a previous one in November. It was very well attended and very interesting, I thought. We discussed anti-gender movements in Bulgaria, Kenya, Paraguay, and Turkey. Since it's such an important issue, and I think we are dealing with this on a global scale, we decided it was interesting to plan a series of a follow-up series to get a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of the many phases of this opposition to gender equality across the globe. So we seek to understand, like, what is this anti-gender campaigns? Who are the actors that oppose feminism and gender and sexual rights in the different contexts? How they mobilize, and what kind of impact or success are they having? But also, and maybe in particular, the kind of feminist responses to these campaigns. So how are both feminist activists and professionals responding to these aggressive campaigns, and how successful are they in countering such forces and striving for intersectional justice? So that is our goal for this particular café, but also the upcoming cafés. And today we have a participatory discussion. So we have presenters, but we also have your voices, and we hope to get a deeper understanding. But we start with 4 very interesting case studies, and I'm very happy to have lined up a number of very interesting speakers today. So welcome to Sahila Nazneen. She will introduce us into the developments in Bangladesh, and I will introduce her more a little bit later. Then she's followed by Elżbieta Korolczuk, who will discuss and compare 2 contrasting cases in Europe, Poland and Sweden. And then we have Anne El-Rai, and she will provide us with an account of developments in Lebanon. So I think this promises to be very interesting. So I will introduce the speakers more extensively later, I want to say we are very happy to have you here today, helping us to understand gender backlash in each of these countries. And I briefly want to take some space to tell us you a little bit more about the project, the Kindle project, the CCINDLE project, as you just called it, which is cooperating with these gender cafés. It's a project that we started 1.5 years ago. It's financed by the European Commission, and it's particularly focused on those anti-gender campaigns. So we work directly with feminist grassroots activists, with institutional actors, and with gender professionals, because we hope to co-create theoretical and practical knowledge on these anti-gender campaigns, and particularly how such campaigns challenge democracy and feminist futures and practices that are focused on intersectional justice. So we are interested in understanding how feminist movements and feminist institutional actors respond to these anti-gender campaigns. And our focus in the project is particularly on Europe. But yeah, we are very interested to understand it also well beyond, because we think there's many interesting cross-links, and this is definitely a transnational phenomenon. And so we are interested to see like what are the similarities and differences in different parts of the world, but also what are the specificities in each context. So this is why we want to work together with feminists that are located in different arenas, professionals, academics, activists, and other places where they are trying to counter anti-gender campaigns and their devastating impact. So without further ado, I want to start with the first presentation, which will be on Bangladesh by Sohila Nazneen. So Sohila, welcome, and it's wonderful to have you here. We've been in touch before, but now I see you, although virtually. Sohila Nazneen is a senior fellow. She's based in the governance cluster at the Institute for Development Studies in the UK. And she leads work on gender, politics, and governance. Her research focuses on feminist movements and backlash, gendered policy processes, violence against women and women's empowerment in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Sohila currently leads the stream on voice and activism against backlash for the Countering Backlash Research Consortium. And she's the editor of Negotiating Gender Equity in the Global South that was published by Routledge in 2019. She convened the IDEA's flagship Master on Gender and Development. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to listen to your contribution. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Connie, and it's a pleasure to meet you virtually and put a face to a name. But also thank you to the Society and also to the CCINDLE project for asking me to speak at this cafe, sharing what we have been learning from the Countering Backlash project, but also the Sustaining Power project that's going on, looking at backlash against women's rights, but also transgender communities and LGBTQI groups in different countries. Aparna, may I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'll talk about Bangladesh, and this is how the presentation is structured. So first I'll talk about what do we know so far about what's been happening, and lots of things have been happening in the way anti-gender backlash has been manifesting. The second thing I will do is I'll try to connect this to the political developments that we are witnessing in Bangladesh and the shifts, because that affects the kind of manifestations that you see in terms of how backlash manifests, but also the countering strategies that you can take given the context. And then I'll touch on in terms of countering strategies, what are the dilemmas that the feminist movement actors, but also transgender community has been facing in terms of organizing and pushing back, and a little bit on where do we go from here. So I draw from various sources, both secondary sources, but also primary sources for the projects that I've mentioned and been involved in. Aparna, can I have the next slide? So what is the nature of anti-gender backlash, and what do we know? It's not that anti-gender backlash is something new or that it wasn't there. It was always there. It was kind of hidden. And it is revealed in moments of when contestations happen, so specific episodes or flashpoints. And these flashpoints are around specific policy areas or specific incidents of violence against activists or particular individuals when they're targeted. I'll give you two examples. One is around the comprehensive sexuality education, so the school curriculum that was developed. And recently, last month, we had an incident where the textbook was torn up by a lecturer in a private university talking about why are these things being taught, etc. With the incident going viral, the teacher being temporarily first suspended, and then the whole issue kind of unfolded on social media and public debate around, do you teach about sexual diversity and transgender communities in school curriculum? So that's one type of flashpoint, what you're seeing very publicly being debated. The other type is around, for example, reforms happening around health policy. So the adolescent health policy in terms of having access to reproductive services and knowledge about different gender identities and how things have unfolded in the policy arena in terms of clauses being removed or hollowed out over time, which you don't necessarily notice because that doesn't come into the public domain. It's the policymakers who are noticing that. But apart from that, obviously, specific individuals are targeted for protesting certain issues. And of course, they face discrimination and biases in the way life unfolds and in terms of access to healthcare, education, and other types of opportunities. So it's systemic, it's continuous, and violence is normalized in a way. If we talk about manifestation of backlash in that way, I've already talked about some of the types. One is, of course, it can be indirect. So you wouldn't notice, but rights that you have would be taken away, hollowed out, without you actually realizing that that's happening. Second, it can be direct. So these are direct physical attacks or online attacks against activists who are protesting issues. Our research has tracked online gender-based violence, including violence against LGBTQI activists. And if you look at the discourse and the frequency of incidents, it is most virulent against LGBTQI communities or people who tend to support LGBTQI rights. But it's also very, very anti-feminist, the discourse itself, including with slogans like feminism is cancer. And I'm sure these would resonate with other presenters and those who work on backlash and how it unfolds in different countries. So obviously that takes me to the last type of manifestation, which is there are discursive strategies that backlash actors use in terms of delegitimizing certain groups' claim over citizenship, over health rights, over sexuality rights, stigmatizing individuals, labeling them in specific ways, and then, of course, pitting one set of rights against another set of rights. So, for example, access to employment or employment quotas for transgender may be pitted against, while there are already gender quotas for women and are transgender groups taking away that space that's reserved for women. That's one way of framing and pitting one set of rights against another set of rights. So Aparna, can I have the next slide? So let me take you to talk about who are the actors and what's happening. So the actors there are a range of actors, and they're very diverse in terms of who the pushback comes from, depending on what issue is being contested. It's quite hard to tell how cohesive these groups are or what their networks are like and how they're connected. Obviously, there are connections, including their transnational connections in terms of who funds these particular groups. Obviously, what is important to note in Bangladeshi politics is the Islamist political parties, while they do not win popular votes in terms of not more than 8%, or to a range of 11%. But the thing is, they have always had veto power over on matters that came to be deemed as cultural or that touches on religion. You always had to take or cater to how they might react and what may be the pushback. In the last decade, what we have seen is emergence of Islamic civil society platforms, starting from name Hifazat-e-Islam to Islami Andolan and other types of platforms, and also sort of emergence of these groups in social media being quite vocal. And these groups are able to mobilize huge demonstration, and I have a picture of it in the next slide. But there's also the bit in terms of what's happening within feminist movement and LGBTQI movement itself, and how much space is there to raise issues around sexuality and debate. And there is also debate around whether using particular terms that are used in Western academic discourses or how things are analyzed, that whether spaces are lost because they're local terms in the way reference is made to transgender groups, and what does it mean? So it's the classic that is it something foreign that's coming or being used to reframe the debate. Aparna, can I have the next slide, please? So this is just a picture of the demonstration that I wanted to show you. If I showed you an aerial view, it's quite scary looking at the numbers. Could I have the next slide, please? So this, I'll talk about what does the political space look like in terms of what is happening in Bangladesh, because that determines how much space you have in terms of countering. So Bangladesh has shifted towards a dominant party ruling in terms of the ruling Awami League has been in power since 2008. The opposition party is very, very weak. Not that the opposition party is a big supporter of gender equality in that sense, but what that also means is that Awami League has control over public administration and also in civil society space in terms of it is quite polarized. So whether you're looking at Journalists Association or Doctors Association or wherever you may get organization and mobilization and pushback from, there are party linkages, so that limits dissent in particular ways. I've already touched on the role of Islamist parties and them having veto power on cultural matters. The other issue that's important to remember is that sexuality and control and regulation of bodies, women's bodies, trans bodies, or even male bodies always existed. It's not that it's something new, but it is also draws on colonial legacies in terms of we were ruled by Britain, and that affects, and that legacy is quite strong. For example, homosexuality being criminalized, that penal code still exists. So the state plays a tricky balance in managing society, and state has contradictory roles. So the state has passed progressive laws, for example, addressing domestic violence against women or promoting certain types of development outcomes. But the state is also limited in terms of what it can push. What we have seen with the democratic dominant party shift is there's been a de-democratization in terms of how much space you have for dissent. Similarly, Bangladesh used to be an aid-dependent country, not anymore. Our growth rate is quite phenomenal. But having said that, that also means that your certain entry points to pressure the government on rights-based issues, particular types of gender, is quite limited. And your independence of the judiciary is also, we are losing that. So judicial activism and possibilities for that is also quite tricky. Along with that, then for feminist movements, to be seen very close to donor agendas is also risky in terms of you don't want to be labeled as Western actor or promoting Westernized agendas. So you play a tricky balance in the way you frame certain issues and how you make claims. Could I have the next slide, please, Aparna?
So Ila, your time is almost up, so can you start wrapping up, please?
Yes. So
yes,
this is about countering, what's happening with countering. So a battle is quite discursive. There's been a lot of framing and trying to claim rights by stealth. So linking it to development outcomes, linking it to reducing violence and all of that. If you look at LGBTQ groups, a lot of the time they opt for strategic invisibility to be part of larger coalitions to push for policy shift or to ensure that the agenda is alive, but not very visible. The other bit is, of course, thinking through how do you deal with when you say LGBTQ issues, trans issues are separated from lesbian and gay rights. And then that splinter means it has an impact in terms of how you frame. And that's something we are grappling with how to do that. And a lot of focus has gone into how do you protect individual actors, because there are attacks, not just direct attacks, but online attacks. But at the same time, we haven't come up with successful strategies as of yet there. Could we go to the next slide, please? And that's the last one. So these are the issues we are grappling with in terms of within the movement. How do we build collective strength? We are not there yet. The second is how do you create alternative narratives? So yes, we have made demands based on rights, trying to connect it to local traditions, but it's the rights frame, the right frame. There are internal dilemmas in terms of you want to make allies and you want to be strategically invisible, but that comes at a certain cost. And how do you work with that? You can remain hidden, but then hidden means, okay, you won't be attacked. But at the same time, when you're asking for protection from the state, it might be you're asking for protection. For example, online attacks is about how the state regulates online spaces. So you might strengthen that regressive agenda. So what do you do? And then how do you hold the space that already exists in the policy space? Like, how do you keep holding it where you're already included? And that's a big dilemma that we are grappling with. So that's pretty much it. That's what I had to say. And I have some resources slide if you guys are interested to look at resources. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Salila. I think this was very, very interesting. Also bringing a lot of these dilemmas, and I think we're grappling with in many contexts, but also seeing, yeah, some very specific issues in this context of Bangladesh. So very interesting, and I'm glad that we have more space to discuss later in the breakout rooms. But we go directly to the next presentation, which will be by Elżbieta Korolczuk from Södertörn University and the University of Warsaw. Elżbieta, she is actually also a member of the Kindle team, so we work together in this team, and she's a long-standing expert on the issue of anti-gender movements. So to introduce a little bit more, she's an associate professor in sociology working at these two universities in Warsaw and Stockholm. Her research interest involves social movements, civil society, and politics of reproduction. And she published several volumes on social movements, civil society, and parenthood. And I think one of the most relevant for this discussion is her recent publication of a book with Agnieszka Graf in 2022, The Anti-Gender Politics in the Populist Moment. It's an open access book, freely available online. And she's also a commentator and a long-time women's and human rights activist. So it's a pleasure, Elżbieta, to have you here today in the Gender Café to talk about two quite particular and specific context in Europe. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for organizing this and to have this discussion, because I think that we really need to know more about our respective contexts and also strategize together. And for a long time, I've been focusing on the Polish context, obviously, because I'm Polish, and in the Kindle project, I'm looking at Sweden. And I must say that I've been worried about Poland for so long, and now I started to worry about Sweden. So it's very ungrateful work in many senses. So if I can have a slide, that would be lovely. And the thing is that if we think about the anti-gender movement, it is often seen as a religious trend, and of course its roots are religious. But I think for the last couple of years, we can see that this is also a political movement. And whether it is, what is the nature of this connection, I think differs from country to country. But what links all those trends is that there is a work around resignification of the term gender and its related issues, such as gender equality, gender identity, gender studies, resignification, which basically posits the everything connected to gender as unscientific and ideological, in a sense that it is not true as in natural sort of family and natural gender identity, as it is connected to religious contexts. But also there is a very strong emotional aspect to these discourses, because gender is becoming associated with threat to children, to natural family, to women as well. So it is connected with a whole host of unwholesome social trends which appear in different countries. And there is also a connection when it comes to policy goals of the actors behind that. But it's also important to see that those policy goals vary from country to country. And of course, in many contexts, it will be connected to abortion, LGBTQ rights, often to transnational legislation or treaties such as Istanbul Convention. And Connie has been writing about this very interestingly. And we have, of course, anti-discriminatory education, sex education, and broadly speaking, the sphere of schooling and education. And of course, knowledge production and academia. And I want to focus on this especially in my today's talk. Next slide, please. When we look at Poland and Sweden, they have often been seen as contrasting cases, right? Poland has been the fastest authoritarian country in Europe, in European Union during the last 8 years. We had a very strong Catholic Church, which tends to be on the conservative side, to put it lightly. And we have right-wing populist parties such as the Law and Justice, which has been in power during the last 8 years. They lost in the last election in October. So in many ways, what I'm talking about is in the past, although, as we all know, these trends tend to linger much longer and much more profoundly than just in connection to the political shifts. And we have quite strong civil society promoting this anti-gender project, often connected to the church, but locally, but also connected to global anti-gender groups, organizations, networks, which operate on the level of European Union, which operate in Latin America, for example. So we can see that it is a truly global movement, which always presents itself as authentic, local, and rooted in local traditions, whichever these traditions may be. And in the Polish context, as you can see from those pictures, the issue of abortion has been on the forefront, and actually the ruling coalition, the then ruling coalition, managed to put forward even more strict legislation concerning abortion, because abortion is and has been banned in Poland, but we have a couple of exceptions, which one of them is they got rid of it now through the Constitutional Tribunal ruling. But also there was an attack on gender ideology in sex education, as in gender studies, and a huge campaign against LGBTQ rights. This map of Poland that you see here on this picture shows the so-called LGBT-free zones. So these were the zones where the local municipalities declared themselves to be free from LGBT ideology, so-called, or adopted a resolution that they are family-friendly. And a very nice and good news is that now we are in the process of the last of those LGBT-free zones withdrawing themselves from those declarations and from those documents through judicial activism, through activism on the ground, and so on. So we can see how this process, the anti-gender project, is changing and is a living thing which shifts both from context to context, but also from specific points of time forward. Next slide, please. So compared to Poland, where we had, demonstrations with people with banners, gender is and Istanbul conventions, Ebola from Brussels to Poland, Sweden seems to be the country where you don't have really anti-gender campaigns, right? Because everyone there says that they are proponents of gender equality, and even the representatives of the Sweden Democrats Party, which is the far right-wing party, which has 22% seats of the Swedish parliament. They say that they are feminists. They say, we are not the radical feminists, of course. We are the kind of good feminists, but still they want to be seen by the public as feminists. However, if you look at what is really going on, you can see a very familiar patterns of attacks, for example, on gender studies, or more broadly critical research on gender and race. And of course, these two issues are very much connected in many contexts. And in the Swedish context, you can very clearly see how this discourse on gender equality, as embraced by right-wing actors, becomes instrumental in attacking immigrants and refugees. So basically, the idea is that we have to protect Sweden from those barbarians, of course, who are racialized in this discourse, because they are a threat to our children, to our women, and to our, in a way, sexual democracy. So you can very clearly see that there are people who are at the forefront of that. And these are, of course, the right-wing representatives of the right-wing parties, such as Sweden Democrats and Christian Democrats. But you can also see intellectuals, journalists, scholars sometimes, who become this kind of figures of authority on the issues of gender with a clearly anti-gender outlook. And of course, there is also civil society, but I would say that this is much less visible than in the context of Poland, partly because there is no religious aspect to that, or at least this religious aspect is not so visible. And lately, there is also a debate around trans rights, which has caught up on those anti-trans discourses in other countries. These discourses are very often framed in this, I would say, opportunistic way to utilize the notion of gender equality as a sort of connective value, which should be understood in a very specific way, obviously lacking this broader context of anti-racist or trans struggles. And here you can see also some, I would say, also specific elements specific to the Swedish discourse. This red dragon that you can see on the picture here is social democrats who are denying the pile of gold to this poor disabled boy, saying that these are the money for migrants, for mass migration, for gender, so you cannot have this money, you won't fit in. So of course, this discourse on the right side is often connected to the idea that we have to rebuild welfare state, but of course by excluding certain groups from this welfare state. So next slide. I would like to focus a little bit on, so at the first moment, at the first sight, we can see that there are differences, but what I'm really looking for are those elements of the anti-gender project which transcend contextual and country differences. And in the Kindle project, we look quite a lot at the ways in which the anti-gender movement or actors seek not only political influence, but also epistemic power, right? So the anti-gender project very much operates in the field of knowledge production, academia, expertise, and it's very active in channeling into those institutions only conservative type of knowledge on gender, which are coming from citizens or coming from social movements. Next slide, please. So we can see how those actors, and this is actually very, I would say, similar in many different contexts, although the specific form can differ, how these actors are trying to challenge the validity of gender studies, critical race studies, basically all those critical approaches which are openly politicizing the question of power and power relations within the field of knowledge. And they are attacked as being ideological or unscientific. So in the Polish context, for example, they will be seen either as sort of communist residue or maybe westernization of Poland. In Sweden, it will be seen as unscientific, almost religious discourse, right? So that it is ideological to the point that it becomes unacceptable within those spaces. And that includes attacking feminist scholars, and that's exactly what Sahela was talking about. And I was quite surprised to talk to people in the Swedish context who were quite cautious to talk to me because they didn't want to be attacked, right? And we always think about, well, Sweden, like who would be afraid of being attacked for being a gender scholar in Sweden? And yet there were attacks online. There were instances, for example, of right-wing activists sort of entering, for example, a course at the university on critical race studies and trying to sort of basically, well, they managed to actually close down the course because it was impossible for the teacher to actually continue, because they were trying to attack or challenge the students as well as the scholars. So in that sense, you can see how these insidious attacks, which often include social media platforms, alternative media outlets, or specific sort of authorities like influencers or politicians on the right, how they create a sense of danger and vulnerability in people. And then, of course, the question is how this affects the things which are studied, and how do we sort of internalize this vulnerability, and we want to basically move towards other, or we choose to move towards other issues, because we just don't want to be in these vulnerable positions, and often for good reasons. Next slide, please. Another strategy is to focus on knowledge production. And here you can see a range of books which have been published during the last couple of years in different languages. So you can see how this community, how this group, milieu, you can say, promote intellectual authorities on gender, which are often journalists, scholars, and they produce books, pamphlets, reports, conference proceedings, and so on. And it's quite interesting because we are gender professionals, right? So it is quite amazing when we go to the bookstore and we see that on the shelf, which is called gender studies, we see books which are basically anti-gender, right? So this is one of the effects, and the goal is to blur the boundaries of what can be seen as knowledge about gender, and what type of sources are seen as legitimate, scientific, and acceptable. So you can see those two books, one white and the other pink. The pink one is the Gender Doctrine, which was published by Ivan Arpi, a Swedish journalist who made a name on critiquing gender studies and gender scholars, together with Anna-Karin Wenham, who is a scholar at university, right? And the next book, co-authored by Arpi, is the one which is white, which says, here is how we all became racists, right? So you can see how those different issues are interconnected, and how there is a very clear effort to build a sense of authority by people who have anti-gender agenda or views. Next slide, please. And also, we can see how there is often cooperation between different actors in the sense of sharing this knowledge, right? Both from social movement, from civil society actors, journalists, but also politicians. And there are conferences, public debates, which are initiated and which are often presented as a sort of free speech sanctuary, right? So we know it from many contexts, US being one of them, where there is a very strong tendency to present anti-gender project as a space for free debate. And of course, the free speech and academic freedom are sort of overlapping here. There is no differentiation between those two. And I think that this is one of the goals, not to have this differentiation. And you have two posters, one from Poland, and there was a conference, 3-day conference called Cultural War in Europe. Does Poland stand a chance? And the funny part is that I was actually invited to this conference because they wanted to have a free debate, of course, right? And then I saw that I was invited to have a panel with a priest who has been using hate speech against homosexual people. And I said that I'm not going to take part in an event where hate speech will be promoted. So they, unfortunately, did not decide to uninvite the hate speech guy. So in the end, I didn't take part in it. And then you have those two lovely men who are Swedish politicians, and they travel around Sweden with basically open debates. We will try to enter one of those debates, so we will see if they're really open. But the theme is culture war, feminism, gender equality, identity walk. And I really love the caption under. Here is why 2 white, middle-aged, heterosexual cis men are right. So we will get to the bottom of it why they're right, not only white. So the next slide, please. And this is, of course, the type the way to both create a community around those issues, but also give people the sense that they are providing a space for free debate. And then, of course, in the countries such as Poland or Hungary or some others, you can see a very clear policy intervention, right, concerning regulations, cutting funding for gender studies, changing curricula, regulations concerning professional advancement, and then, of course, building alternative educational institutions. One of them is Collegium Intermarium, which was opened in Warsaw 2 years ago, and their selling line is Free University of Central Europe. Of course, the idea is that they want to replace Central European University, which is now in Vienna. Not so successful after all, because this year they enrolled only 2 students. So they had big plans, but so far they are not that big. And next slide, please. So as I said,
sorry,
yeah, I'm finishing now.
You ran off. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. 1 minute. So I think that it's good to understand that what we see as opposition to gender, this broadly defined gender, is part of a broader populist interventions in the field of knowledge. So we have to try to connect the dots also with studies on climate change, for example, and opposition to this type of knowledge, to critical race studies, because we see how these discourses and interventions establish anti-intellectualism as a form of political identity, right? Which is part of a populist claim that we need to get rid of those horrible, corrupt elites. Often it is interwoven with conspiratorial thinking. There is a clear structure of conspiratorial thinking in that, and we need to get a closer look at that. But at the same time, there is a very clever shift towards presenting religious beliefs on, for example, gender identity or abortion in the human rights language, right? So we no longer talk about the hells of fire awaiting women who do abortion, but we talk about the psychological effects that are allegedly connected to abortion, and we need to protect women's rights, right? And then we have also the technological change, which means that pseudoscience or troll science is being massively produced and promoted through social media platforms, which means that there is no way to actually engage in a discussion with this kind of production. And then, of course, the question of counter knowledge, right? The knowledge which is produced to counter specific views or beliefs on gender equality, and basically social structure and power, because as I said, it is much broader. So this is my last word. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elspeth. I think this is again a very interesting comparison, and it touches really upon a lot of our work, right? How gender expertise becomes contested and questioned, and yeah, I think it has very deep implications. Thanks a lot. So we continue with our final presentation, moving again to another context. So it's a pleasure to welcome Ney El-Rai from Lebanon here. So thank you for being here. She's a journalist, a researcher, activist, and gender advocacy professional from Beirut, Lebanon. And research interests include women's rights in the media, gender dynamics, and sectarian politics in Lebanon. Her work focuses on the intersection of knowledge production. So we go back to this topic again, be it academic research or journalistic reporting and gender advocacy programming. And she's currently engaged in countering anti-feminist backlash project with the Arab Institute for Women at the Lebanese American University. So thanks a lot for being here, and the floor is yours.
So good morning, Toronto time. It's 10 a.m. I realize it's the day is ending for others. So so first of all, thank you for the invite. And I would actually like to start by saying that we can never speak adequately about backlash without addressing the structures that make up our realities. And I'm glad that Suhaila started this conversation with this. Suhaila is our partner, by the way, on the project. So without acknowledging one of the most violent structures of oppression, which is settler colonialism, which all indigenous peoples the world over have unfortunately witnessed, from here in Canada to the Arab world, and which we've seen everywhere throughout history, most recently, and maybe perhaps most imminently and most intensely in Palestine, where as a result of Israel's brutal occupation and its relentless months-long genociding in Gaza, women have lost their lives, lost their limbs, lost their husbands, fathers, siblings, children, their entire families, lost their offices, clinics, universities, lost their homes and all of their belongings. Girls and women in Palestine today are watching how the whole world demonized the men in their lives, their partners, fathers, and brothers, how they're being arbitrarily detained in the hundreds from their homes, schools, hospital beds, and checkpoints. Women are being arbitrarily executed in front of their family members. They're using 10 scraps as menstrual pads because they've been denied access to basic menstrual products. They're miscarrying due to trauma, injury, or torture. They're undergoing childbirth without anesthesia, food, water, heat, or medical supplies. They're being forced to leave their newborns when evacuating. They're starving. They're being subjected to multiple forms of sexual assault, stripped naked and searched by male Israeli officers, threatened with rape and sexual violence, and locked in cages and denied food and raped. So I wanted to start this with this because any discussion on gender should start with this undeniable reality. And because while Lebanon is not occupied, backlash there is a legacy of enduring structures. And to start with my presentation, next slide, please. First slide, please. Or first several slides, second or third. So basically, we're part, Lebanon is, the Institute is part of a 6-year-long project with the Institute for Development Studies, where Suhaila works, and we work with her. And our thematics are, so basically we're trying to understand anti-feminist backlash and the erosion of gender, like spaces for gender justice actors, and to find new opportunities for feminist impact. We are working on 3 thematics, the women's political participation, civil marriage, under the umbrella of personal status, and violence against women. Next, please. Okay, so basically, speaking of structures, it's a very fitting first slide. Our conversation about backlash starts with the structures that operate in our lives in Lebanon, basically. And these are, among which the most important 3 are, first, the personal status laws, because personal status, which is marriage, inheritance, alimony, custody, and all of that, is ruled by 15 different sectarian courts. So basically, there is no one unified law that rules everyone, and that's one of the oppressive structures. 2, something that scholar Maya Mekdashi calls the sextarian citizenship, where there are 2 registers of recognition in the country, sex and sect. So basically, there isn't an abstract mass of Lebanese citizens, and the country is ruled with a sextarian framework where sect and sex are mutually constitutive modes of political difference in the country, and where sovereignty and the state effect itself emerges from the management of these modes of political difference. And the third oppressive structure is the patrilineal census registration. Next, please. So basically, a census document is one of 3 official documents that the state of Lebanon issues to citizens. So there's a national ID card, a passport, and a census document. And the 3 are interchangeable for most bureaucratic procedures, but it's impossible to receive or renew an ID or a passport if you don't, without producing a new census document. And this, to us, in the framework of our work on backlash, we see this as the root of all other structures, because citizens in Lebanon are disaggregated according to sect and placed as extended patriarchal families into separate folders. And it's on the basis of this shared sectarian folder that extended patriarchal family serial numbers are issued. So census registration is a good example, not only of the primary role of family within the Lebanese political system, but also of how this violence and this hostility where it's originating from and how structure is really at the base of it all. Next, please. So what you see, I don't know if you see it, this is what it looks like. And if you notice, there are two names. I will tell you why they're crossed in red with a red pen. So next, please. So basically, census documents are organized by family. So individuals from the same extended patriarchal family carry the same registration number. So both male and female citizens are registered in local offices according to 4 metrics. So the region of origin, kinship, and that's very important, or marital status, sect or personal status, and sex. And these 4 metrics determine which folder an individual's census information is placed in, and importantly, the mechanisms for this information to change in relation to various life events like marriage, death, divorce, conversion, etc. Next, please. You can see here, next, there's a visual that maybe, explains this further. I'm gonna proceed in the interest of time, but for you to look at it and see how it operates. So basically, because serial numbers are distributed on the basis of extended patriarchal families, female citizens can never be considered heads of families. They're either recorded as daughters to their fathers or wives to their husbands. So when one of us is married, she is removed from, this is why they're crossed out in red, she's removed from her family serial numbers. This is my census, my family census, and these are my sisters. So when they're married, they're crossed out of their fathers and they're moved to their husbands. They inherit their the local districts of the husbands, and they are counted as being from this region, and then they vote in that region. So basically, women can only be added or subtracted from these patriarchally organized databases of extended families. So women are registered and quantified in relation to male citizens as wives or daughters, while male citizens form the nodal point around which these relations, the legal, bureaucratic, and kinship relations develop. So to make a bit of theoretical sense, and I apologize to Suhaila for hearing this for the 17th time. Next, please. Yeah, okay. So basically, the Lebanese patriarchal power matrix and state building project revolves around 3 notions. I'm going to speak about only 2 today in the interest of time, but these notions were coined by Lebanese American anthropologist Sarah Joseph, in case any of you is familiar with her work. So I'm going to talk about the kin contract and political familism because they relate to what we're talking about today. So kin groups and extended families are recognized as legitimate political actors in the country. So it's a haven that the Lebanese have turned to and continue to turn to for protection, for resources, for jobs, under a weak and incapacitated state. Again, a legacy like this is also like arguably a colonial legacy. So under this frail state, kin became the anchor of security for Lebanese citizens who use real and idiomatic kinship in all realms of life, market, in the workplace, and in politics. Next, please. So the kin contract is the formal and informal understanding that membership in a family precedes and preempts membership in the state, and that families can legitimately claim prior loyalty of their members over and above the state's claim to loyalty. And so state actors, political leaders, militias, used family and continue to use families to mobilize and organize the population. They mobilize their own kin. They defer to the citizens' kin in matters of relevance to the state. And the political leader is seen as a family member, as a senior patriarch, so to speak. So paving the way for all leaders to present themselves as the senior patriarchs of the extended political family, calling for loyalty, deference, and service due to them as heads of these families. And so this validates the patriarchal extended family as a venue of social and political control, and as as we argue, the most significant deterrent to Lebanese women's full citizenship. And I think this is a key point as to why we say backlash in Lebanon, or what is framed as backlash, is different. So political familism, on the other hand, is the deployment of family institutions, ideologies, idioms, practices, relationships by citizens to activate their demands to the state, and by state actors to mobilize grounds for governance based on a civic method of kinship. Everybody is the brother of everybody. We're all a very big loving family, and the public discourse that privileges family. So political leaders assimilate these kinship norms into their practices. They treat the state as a source of resources to expand to kin and kin-like connections, definitely privileging males and elders over females and juniors, distributing state resources in function of their friendships and connections, deferring to family heads in matters related to families. The religious authorities have also continually referenced family and kinship, elevating kin to the level of the sacred. So this privileging of males and elders that is justified in kin moralities and is sanctified by religion have always been a constant feature of social and political arenas in Lebanon, social and political life in the country. And elites have distributed resources on the basis of these relationships, subsidizing the control of males and elders over females and juniors in the family. Next, please. And so I've added also here another notion that is not by Sarah Joseph, that is by Maya Mekdashi, actually. Next, please. Is it there? Yes. So basically, we speak of the Lebanese state as an epidermal state, and in the sense that it performs its sovereignty by materializing and regulating bodies through secularization, through violence, through bureaucracy, as we've seen with census, and through the law, using bodies' gendered, racial, sexual, and class stakes as sites of this performance, and exerting violence against people positioned differently at various levels of precarity. So this state has always been violent, and I've added this notion because when we speak of marginalized communities, this is where it comes to play. So it's always been obvious, violent, and sovereign to vulnerable groups: queers, migrant workers, refugees, the incarcerated, sex workers in Lebanon. Next, please.
Nay.
Yes.
Your time is up, so can you start to wrap up, please?
I'm going to try.
Yeah.
So basically, in light of this, and I talk a bit about the backlash in mainstream literature, how it's always seen as part of a larger reaction, as framed as a response to actual or perceived challenges to existing hierarchies. Next, but how in a country like Lebanon, we look at it differently. So basically, we see the hostility and the exclusion experienced by women in Lebanon in all spheres as fundamentally incompatible with the way it's defined in mainstream literature. We see it as viciously built into the system, as something that is beyond a reaction to a gain, and something that when Suhaila speaks about Bangladesh, is also applicable to Lebanon, with structural and embedded in the systems. I'm going to skip these to actually get to how we're trying to look at backlash as well in the country. Can you skip this, please? So the contextual definition that we came up with aims to flip the script on backlash, from framing it as the violence that marginalized communities endure to what dominant powers would do when the system that upholds their privilege goes through a moment of peril. And that's very also specific to Lebanon. So it shifts the attention to the network of powers that perpetrate this violence, as opposed to what those enduring it might have done to trigger it. The definition attempts to frame the political juncture, the system in crisis, as the trigger of the backlash unleashed by its dominant players. So backlash here, or what we frame as backlash, serves as a tool to divert attention from looming socioeconomic menaces, to help the system avoid existential discussions, and to extend its longevity by creating imaginary enemies. Next, please. So this is the example, the starting point of a definition. It's various forms of structural discrimination and exclusion that are fed, incubated, and fueled by the sectarian epidermal state or system, and that fight and obstruct advocacy for rights. But more importantly, and this is like a very important contention we have with the definition out there, it's impeding the possibility of progressive gains. So it's not reacting to any of this. So this structural hostility departs from familial structures, it travels across generations, and it cuts through governmental, non-governmental institutions and the market. Next, please. So the various forms of violence and backlash in Lebanon are not on a spectrum per se, but instead can be described as a pool of variegated tools coexisting and operating concurrently and complementarily, making up a patchwork of hostile strategies that authorities use on demand, depending on the requirements of the political moment. Here we speak of different kinds. We have the systemic backlash, which we've spoken about, systemic violence, so to speak, as a default. And we can talk later, maybe in the breakout rooms, about tactical and atomized backlash in the interest of time. Thank you. I am notorious for not being time blind and not being able to contain myself within a time period. So sorry.
It's also a very difficult task to do, tell all this information in 10 minutes, right? It's a quite complex story. But we're happy to have your slides, and it would also, I think, appreciate a lot if there's any other read-offs that we can have in the chat. That would be great, Nay. So thanks a lot for this. So yes, we are going to continue our discussion, but in smaller groups in the breakout sessions. So I think we'll have a slide of how that functions. So here we have a couple of rules. So please be respectful for one another, and we hope we can all participate. But please do this in a good way. Take space, make space, listen, and we ask every breakout rooms to make a report. And report back to us, because we're very curious also to what others will discuss. So the breakout rooms, we have 4 breakout rooms with the speakers and me. So I think you can all, wow, I see a lot of interesting things in the chat. So great, thank you. So you can all choose which room you want to be in. I think that's how it functions. But I asked somebody from the SGP to maybe step in and explain a little bit better, because this is the first time that I'm actually conducting this breakout thing. So
no worries. Well, actually, those present will be randomly divided into the breakout rooms. Very importantly, the breakout rooms will not be recorded, so please feel free to share your experiences and insights on these topics. The 4 rooms, as Professor Rogeband said, will be moderated by the speakers, and there will also be a member of the SGP team taking notes who will report back when you come back after the 15-minute discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So we will be randomly allocated, right? Enjoy the discussions, and we look forward to hear what you've been discussing.
But if folks, we are at time, so we understand if anyone wants to drop off. But if people are able to stay on for a few more minutes, then we can maybe hear from our volunteers who kindly took the notes from each room to briefly report out, and then I'll request Connie to tie things together and close the event.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if each of the breakout rooms could briefly, very briefly share what you've been discussing? So can I give the floor to the first? Joshua, you want to start?
Yes, happy to go first, and I'll try to be brief but comprehensive. A lot was spoken about in the breakout room. A couple of key points. One, India and Iraq were identified as having markedly similar dynamics that were discussed in the presentations, but also dynamics that diverged at certain points. In India, in particular, the Hindutva movement is a major backlash after, and yet it is also combines this with Islamophobia, and the BJP government also has a contradictory and at times ambiguous political position insofar as it often, in some cases, it presents itself as a trans-friendly actor, and yet makes it at the same time impossible for trans people to change their identifiers in governmental documents. And this is exacerbated by a number of structural barriers, including a digital divide. And they also talked about the ways that trans identities play out differently outside of the West, in particular in India, that there's a culturally recognized third gender, which has some public legitimacy. And an important dynamic here is that this can be attached to discourses about defending and promoting tradition, which may neutralize the kind of radical political claims that can be made on this basis. Other major point, and I will end with this one, is that participants spoke about the ways that these kind of attacks and this backlash can introduce fractures in feminist movement and groups because it creates various incentives to seek out security, to maintain access to state benefits, and to, in other words, also sacrifice certain groups on the altar of public respectability. Some groups, for example, say that they will not work with LGBTQI individuals, and in so doing, maintain the ability to operate in certain public spaces. Additionally, a problematic dynamic that was noted was that in a subtle form of backlash is that many UN agencies are dropping the word gender from the position from the titles of the positions that they're advertising, which it was seen as a kind of concession to these actors. But I'll leave it there to go into the other discussion groups.
Thank you very much, Yasha. Who else wants to follow up with another report?
I can go for my breakout room. So
Please,
the main comments were kind of around how well organized and connected the movements are. So there were instances of letters around comprehensive sexuality education, the same text and letter being localized, but being shared across countries. So it may appear that these are kind of concerned parents in one location, but actually it's part of a wider transnational movement. Also follow-up comments about the bureaucracy of the state and how things like taxation can be used to fund anti-gender movements through the church in Italy, for example. And then lots of discussions on threats to countering anti-gender movements in different geographic areas. So what might the future look like with a potential Trump presidency, or figures like Bolsonaro and others in Latin America. And then just to quickly close, I guess, some ideas of how can we counter these? So targeting private companies, can we kind of capitalize on funding outside of the month of Pride, for example? Tracking the funding of anti-gender movements, and then kind of uniting wider movements like climate justice, economic justice, and creating a politics of hope that doesn't have casting enemies as part of that.
Thank you. That's very interesting point. Who wants to
breakout session, room number 2?
Yeah,
there were a lot of questions for Nay. She started to explain about the backlash and how it starts with the government and how they frame it. Normally when, let's say, the politician needs to create panic, they use gender as the enemy in this sense, and feminism. There was a question about her presentation about the epidermal states, what it means, and she explained that it has a long history of literature on how Lebanon is a secreted. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly. Thank you so much. State, and how from the word epiderm, like it's all on the surface in that sense. And for minorities and communities, LGBT communities and marginalized groups, the state has always been violent. Then another question was about having a queer community in Lebanon. While she was explaining that there are so many obstacles, then she said that there is a queer community and that there is a lot of bars, and openly there are many prides that have been happening, and many people speak very openly about LGBT issues and sexuality, but at the same time there is an article in the law that's against it, but in theory the community has coexisted even though there is a violence against it for many years. But the last years it has escalated even more, this violence. The third question, I think, was about a comparison for Lebanon and Canada, since Nay is living now in Canada, and what kind of backlash exists in both states. She said that sometimes menstruation is referenced and it reminds her of home. But also when it comes to curricula, for example, the backlash is very different, because in Lebanon, there is no curricula about sex or LGBT or, for example, for trans rights. But when it comes to Canada, they are discussing about having sex ads and so on. So there cannot be a clear comparison in this sense. And one final remark that was made was interesting about how we are still struggling in 2024. Is it becoming more problematic, or what is happening that we are still talking about, let's say, the struggles of feminism and gender equality? But the discussion was that now we are more aware and people are fighting more fiercely because people understand more capitalism and imperialism. And so this is why the fight seems to get stronger, but it's not getting worse in terms of women and the gender, let's say, yeah, aspects. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sinita. I wish I was in all the breakout rooms. And the final one, I think, the final breakout room.
I think breakout room 3. Thank you, Connie. So we had 4 case studies as such. So examples from Peru, Uganda, Argentina, and Kyrgyzstan came up. And our discussants brought up the point that we are all in our silos. And when we come out of those, such as in this anti-gender cafe, we realize that there's so much, undercurrent themes that are common all across the board. So as feminists, we have to deal with changing strategies of anti-gender movements, particularly in anti-gender movements across Latin America. So one of the discussants, she was very generous with sharing the anti-gender movement documentary in Latin America, which we may share with everybody else. And she talked about Don't Mess With My Kids movement in Peru. And then in context of Uganda, the institution of church that influences the policies and different structures, and it gets conflated with structural violence, right? And there is this entire concept that queerness is very un-African. And so say in the context of Uganda, you will have women empowerment groups that are anti-queer. So we have to also bridge that queer solidarity and women empowerment on ground, because there's this anti-homosexuality act and legislations that are, across Kenya, Ghana, and Uganda are taking root, particularly in the last couple of years. And in Argentina, legalization of abortion did take place in 2020, countering the retrospective logic of the 1920s that suspended SRHR. So that was a positive shift. But again, we have far-right politics that is coming up back, in Argentina. So the youth is supporting most of this far-right politics, which is a dangerous development indeed. And in Kyrgyzstan, we have a new legislation about the protection of family values. So in the garb of family values, there is this propagation of colonialism as well as nationalism that is getting conflated. So these are some interesting points that were interwoven, and I think all of us have really broken out of our silos and come together to really see the commonalities of anti-gender movements. So yeah, thank you for the enriching discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thank you also for the great reports. I think that was quite a task. Yeah, so I just wrote down a couple of points that I think are interesting because this is the first of a series, right? So we hope to follow up, and I think there's many points on the table now that require a deeper discussion and going more deeply into. So I think definitely we want to hear more context, right? I think this is very rich to hear all these different contexts, because yes, indeed, we know that there's all these transnational connections and there's a lot of sharing and borrowing among anti-gender movements, but at the same time, we also see very specific way they link in different contexts and the kind of very specific discourses that they elaborate to suggest that they are authentic and domestic and local and so on. So I think that's definitely very interesting to understand. There's been some comments in the chat about the funding. That's definitely an interesting topic, but there's some good reporting on that, I think, both in Europe, but also the Global Philanthropist has an interesting report. So I think that work is done by journalists, and I think that's definitely worth checking out. One topic I also wrote down of that maybe we need to go deeper into is how feminist and LGBT movements respond, right? And also like how because there's so much work from all kinds of campaigns of trying to split and create all kinds of divisions within feminism and LGBT movements, and also this is going on within those movements, and some international organizations actually also move in that direction, right? They are splitting issues. So I think looking deeper at that, the dangers of that, and also like, because in the Kindle project we very much look at intersectional solidarity and how does that happen, right? And what are the problems in getting into the intersectional responses within movements, because I think this is a real issue and a real danger. There's, I mean, recently I was invited by something of the United Nations where they really talk about like, oh, we need to split feminist or gender equality and LGBT issues, right? And I think that's those are issues we need to discuss more deeply, like what are the implications and dangers of that. And I think, yeah, what came out very strongly for me today in this discussion was also the role of state and state, how states are implicated, right, and how states can sponsor, and also seeing the continuity, right, because there's a tendency to see anti-gender as a new thing. There is some new parts of it, but there's also this continuity. I think that's been pointed out by some of the presenters very well. So I think, yeah, looking deeper into the role of state actors and state sponsorship, I think is a very interesting follow-up topic as well. So I would, if you have any ideas about follow-up gender cafes, you can either write to us, to the Kindle project, put it in the chat or whatever, or reach out to SGP. We're definitely interested in hearing your opinions and then hearing any ideas of what you would like to go more deeply into. So yeah, our time is gone. It's too short, right? 1.5 hours, but there's the good news that we have follow-up sessions. So I once again want to thank the contributors for your great talks. Wonderful, really very interesting. Sorry the time was so short and that you had to be so concise. Also, thanks for all you here and sharing your ideas and thoughts and also your experiences, the nice discussions. It's been great. And yeah, I look forward to the next ones. So have a wonderful, whatever, day, evening, I don't know, night, what time of the world you are, but thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you again for joining us. Please fill out our feedback survey. I'm putting it in the chat now. And do not hesitate to write us at info@genderprofessionals.org and find out more about SGP membership. And I also put it in the chat some links, how to subscribe to the Kindle newsletter, how to subscribe to the SGP newsletter. So stay tuned for other cafes throughout the year. Have a nice day or evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Jordana, can we stop the recording? Are we still recording?